Welcome back, students. So glad that we're able to do this together as a class. Keep in mind that if you ever have any questions during this course, that you can email me. Best way to do that is to my work address, which is my church, MARK at rabbitcreekchurch.org. MARK at rabbitcreekchurch.org. You can also text me at 907 250 5166. If you have any questions, make sure you're staying up with coursework and make sure you're checking messages and announcements on your Blackboard in order to make sure that you're getting done the work that you need to do. This is lecture 2 from the week 3 session. And so if you missed lesson 1 of week 3, go back and watch that first. We picked up with chapter 4, and we were talking about grace and mercy. And now we're going to be talking about, as seen on page 51 and 50 prior to that, this blaming and shaming, this blaming and the shaming. Now, obviously, this is something we do not want to do. When you look at the big picture, biblically speaking, we know that there is a thing called conviction, and that's something that God does. But he does not shame us. He does not say, "How dare you?" He says, "You can do better." This is what conviction is. It's you have done wrong, repent of that, and it's the knowledge of you can do better with my strength. Think of that when you think about marriage, that couples have choices, that husbands and wives can, if they choose foolishly, blame and shame, which is a lack of forgiveness, which is not Christian, but it also hurts the spouse because when the spouse hurts their spouse, it hurts themselves as well. So it causes harm between their relationship with God, the relationship with the spouse, and even in their own being. So the page 50 and 51 are very important for us to understanding how to have conflict well and how to let go of things that need to be let go of and take possession or ownership of our own things that are hindering us from being the spouse that we should be. The blaming and shaming, let me just read the first paragraph and we'll discuss some more in the second paragraph. It says judgmental attitudes are guaranteed to crush love. You can fill in the blank. It goes something like this: I'll love you if, or I'll love you when. These conditional judgments bring on an automatic defensive stance to withhold yourself in body, mind, and spirit. It's excruciating to be unacceptable because it strikes the very core of where it hurts. The shaming message says there's something radically wrong with you, and unless changes are made, you will not be acceptable. This is a harsh blow. Shame shatters confidence and makes us feel we are a wrong. This is a constant guilt, which we feel when we've done a wrong. Notice this difference between you are a wrong versus you have done a wrong. We all have done wrong. We have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We have all sinned against our spouses. But that's not who we are. That's not our identity. Continues on. Shame takes a personal toll on self-esteem. No wonder shame-based comments are so toxic and elicit such reactivity. The blaming makes one feel inadequate and deficient. This is important for us to understand that a husband is to respect or to love his wife, and a wife is to love her husband, this shared submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. And when that happens, the frequency of blaming and shaming decreases, hopefully to the point where it is little to none, working its way towards none. The next paragraph says shame is a deficient based judgment that breeds distrust, suspicion, inferiority, and uncertainty. The book says uncertainly, but that's a typo. So uncertainty. Grudges and resentment get magnified in a vicious cycle that gets increasingly nasty. Spouses begin to calculate counterattacks, condemning each other in a destructive game of non acceptance. Barriers are constructed to keep each other out, but they also keep out any chance of love getting through. It's a sad state of affairs. In the depth of painful reactivity, no one wins. If a marriage ever moves into a win lose relationship or a win lose situation, it is truly a lose lose. Because even if you win and in the process your spouse loses, then you have just caused a loss or aided to a loss for the one you are to love dearest. This is nonsensical. This is exactly the opposite of what we all desire in marriages. However, it happens on a regular basis. So, what the Baldwins are doing, and in many ways, what this class is designed to do, is help us understand the value of marriage and to treat it as such. One of the ways to think of this concept is to think of yourself as a child, or now think of yourself as a parent if you're a parent. When you're a child, if your parents taught you and corrected you, they were doing the right thing. If you were a child and your parents condemned you and made you feel less than, they were not doing the right thing. The same is true for you as a parent. If you correct your daughter, if you correct your son and say that was a bad choice and here is your consequence, but you can do better, and I hope to see you do it better next time. And I'm going to give you the tools to help you. I'm going to talk to you about what it is that you can do better instead of just saying, go to your room and think about that. Well, give them something to think about. Give them that time out and say, what is it you need to think about? And here's how you can think about that. Now, we don't send our spouses the time out, but maybe we need to put ourselves in time out at times and say, let me go think about this. And then give each other permission to have those moments where we can reflect and then come back together and share what you've learned. There's a ministry called Grace Marriage, and it's a wonderful ministry, and it helps us to understand that the dialogue is so important, and that idea that there's a grace-based marriage, and there is a marriage that is based on the things that we do. And so a productive marriage in the sense of I am accomplishing these things. You expect me to do laundry, so I'm doing laundry. You expect me to cook dinner, so I cook dinner. You expect me to be the one who pays the bills. And anytime this performance-based marriage, as the Grace Marriage Ministry calls it, uh, anytime that gets out of hand, which is often, then there is tension between the spouses. And what the Grace Marriage says is, yes, we have this tendency to parcel out responsibilities. And yes, we understand that there are times where we are very clear with each other. Could you please do this? This is an expectation. But again, as Balzac are saying, I will love you if, and I will only do this if, that's not grace marriage. If we say to ourselves, I really wish my spouse would take care of that task that she normally does or he normally does. But out of grace, I'm going to go ahead and do what I'm supposed to be doing or we have agreed I should be doing without comparing myself with the other. And that is an important aspect of marriage. Over on page 51, last paragraph in that first section says this: non acceptance puts marriage on an unequal footing. Non acceptance puts marriage on an unequal footing. Sometimes I refer to marriage as a three-legged race where husband and wife have their center leg tied together. And in some elementary schools, they have removed the three-legged race on field days because of injuries where they just can't get in rhythm. And sometimes this is what marriages look like when we're trying to run and one is dragging and one is trying to go too quickly and their rhythm is off. But when husband and wife agree on here's the pace, here's what we need to be doing together, then there's flow and there's smoothness and there is a pace and a routine, a valuing of each other. A person not saying, whoa, you're too slow, and a person saying, not whoa, you're too fast. But the fast person is saying, I can slow down, and the slow person saying, I can speed up. And it coming together in this beautiful rhythm that is to be in marriages. We also can see that there is this relationship power in America, the country I know best. We talk a lot about freedom. We talk a lot about personal rights. We talk a lot about power. It starts as a young child when parents are comparing, or children rather, comparing the parents. It's the old, my dad can beat up your dad, or my mom's smarter than your mom, or we judge by how much money or how big of a house or how nice of clothes we're wearing. And this idea of comparison and who's in the inn and who is the most powerful, who's in charge. And this has bled over into marriages sometime, but we also need to have this healthy aspect of marriage in our lives, and we're going to get that into in a little bit. But I first want to talk about this idea back on 51, which is going to lead into that. When I'm thinking about power, I'm thinking, how can I be stronger? How can I be better? Well, this plays into our next conversation with this idea that we have differences, but we need to understand they're not deficits. And page 51 really goes into this. Back to the honeymoon period illustration, we tend in times of dating and honeymoon to think about the fact that, isn't that cute how my spouse does fill in the blank differently than I fill in the blank. I like the way they fill in the blank as opposed to the way I fill in the blank. Somewhere along the journey, those items in the blanks become annoyances. What once was cute is now annoying. What once was different in a delightful way is now different in a frustrating way. And couples need to learn how to deal with this. A man named Larry Link, a friend of mine and a minister for many years in the church where I grew up, he and his wife have done marriage seminars. They did one up here in Alaska many, many years ago. And maybe not many, but several years ago. And during that conference, Larry said this statement. I wrote it down. He said, you have a choice. You can either kill the dream and enjoy the reality, or you can kill the reality and live the dream. You can kill the dream. Now, this is not destructive in nature in the sense of negative, but this is destructive in nature in the sense of, I have this pie in the sky, or I have this perfect vision of what marriage is supposed to look like. That's the dream of which he speaks. He says, if you're going to really enjoy reality, you need to let that dream die. Doesn't mean you give all up hope and say, well, I was really hoping for a charming husband, but he's lazy. Or I was really hoping for a beautiful wife, but she doesn't take care of herself. That's not what this is talking about. What this is talking about is, we realize that our spouse cannot be everything we expect them to be. And my marriage is not going to look like this marriage. Our marriage is our marriage. This is what we need to see. And if we live for something that's unachievable, if we live for something that's impractical, we're going to kill our reality. But he says the better choice is to enjoy the reality, to be a part of this, so that then we are living the dream. Living the dream now means I'm living with joy. I'm living in the fact that I love my spouse. My spouse loves me, and things are healthy. And I remember to forget that there are many things that I used to think were priorities that just aren't anymore. And through that, you can live a good marriage. So a question for you, if you're married, is, what differences in your spouse surprised you? What differences in your spouse surprised you? And now, what differences that surprised you once were a joy to you, are cute to you, but now are not so joyous and are now frustrating? What is it that you can do to look at these things in a new light, to look at these in a way that says, I like this, or maybe I don't like this, but I understand that I'm different and I'm okay with this? These are important things to ask. Then on page 52 and 53, we talk about specific gender differences. Now, we live in a world where there's a lot of confusion over gender, where people even doubt whether they are the gender that their body tells them are. It tells them they are. Gender, biblically speaking, is something that God assigns either male or female, and males are males and females are females. That being said, we need to understand that there's a wide spectrum upon where people fall. And what's happened often is people stick men on one side of the gender issue and women on the other, meaning that men all have to be rough and gruff. And if a boy plays with dolls as a kid, there's a problem. And women have to be nice and sweet. And if a girl plays with chucks as a child, there's a problem. Because some people looked at that, this is cause in many ways, many other factors, but cause in many ways, boys to begin to wonder, I'm different. Does that mean I'm not a boy or I'm not a man? Some girls look at themselves and say, I'm different. I'm different than the girls around me. And they say, well, am I really a girl? The media and others keep trying to tell me maybe I'm not. That's really an issue that's related to this course in the way of who are you in gender, and so therefore who do you choose to marry, which is somewhat a conversation for another day. But I bring that up to say that when we talk about gender differences, we're not saying that they're polar opposites, but we are saying there are some things that are almost universal among men and almost universal among women, regardless of culture, regardless of background, regardless of instruction. There are some things that are just in the XY DNA, if you will, and the XX DNA. And this book's going to talk a little bit about this on page 52 and 53. And it is this appreciating gender differences. On page 52, it talks about gender is an essential part of our distinctiveness according to Genesis 1. Male and female are created for each other. Then over on page 53, being male or female impacts how we relate to each other as spouses. When we relate as gendered persons, we see ourselves in contrast to each other, giving us a clearer definition of self. Dedo gives additional insight on this point. Quote, the marriage relationship is uniquely an image in that the otherness of the partners, and so the obviousness of one having and being what the other is not, male, female, and of one being able to reflect to the other that which the other cannot of itself know or see in its own self-reflection, is acknowledged and structurally represented in a unique way in a lifelong relationship of faithfulness. There's a lot in there. I encourage you to go back and read it. But we relate as gendered persons. In healthy Christian relationships, a man is going to respond to a man in a friendly way, and that is going to be gender appropriate. Now take that and take it into the dating phase of a man and a woman now, and a man and a woman in marriage, and they're going to react differently to that man. And this is not just true for marriage, it's in friendships as well. And we just respond differently. Again, across the spectrum of where people fall as far as how emotional they are, how vocal they are, how in touch with their feelings they are, these kind of things. But males are males, females are females, and they point out that there is a difference that needs to be recognized. And as Dedo said, the marriage relationship is uniquely an image in that the otherness of the partners, and he goes on to say this otherness that comes together. As we go to the page 55 section of your book, what they do is they look at the Myers-Briggs. Now, commercial break, if you will. One thing that I highly recommend for couples is to do the Enneagram. It's a very interesting personality test to look at, and it's easy to do. It's online. You can look at it, and you find yourself being either a 1 or 2 or 3, all the way around to a 9. And when you find out what your spouse is, you find how you can truly connect with one another on a level that fits their Enneagram. Well, another one of those tests is the Myers-Briggs. Perhaps you've taken this. And on page 55, they relate this to marriage. We have found the well-known Myers-Briggs personality type indicator useful in understanding how a couple can use their personality differences and similarities to strengthen their marriage. So, example, my marriage, I'm Enneagram 7, which means I like adventure, I like newness. My wife is a 5, and this means she's a person of wisdom, person who thinks through things, who strategizes things. And so, take a vacation, for example, Von K. My wife is going to be the one that better plans that opportunity. I'm going to be the one that makes sure that we try new things and we risk a little bit. And that's a good combination because if we only went with my style, we'd show up, we wouldn't have what we need. If we went with her style, we'd be limited on our experiences. And so we come together and sharpen one another and encourage one another. Going down further in the book, it says the four major categories of the Myers-Briggs personality typology are extroversion versus introversion, sensory versus intuitive, thinking versus feeling, judging versus perceiving. This extroversion and introversion are pretty helpful, sometimes easy to identify, but also we often rise to the occasion when we need to if we're introverts, and we can withhold our enthusiasm if we're extroverts when we need to, but we're usually one or another, and that's important to know in marriages. So, for example, if you're an extrovert and your spouse is an introvert, and you want to go to a Christmas party or a large celebration of some sort, recognize that this will drain them eventually if you do too much of this. If you're an introvert and everything needs to be quiet and everything needs to be sedate, an extrovert is going to jump out of their socks, we might say. And so there's a combination of understanding. The extrovert says, well, maybe we need to go to this event and not stay very long. The introvert says, I can stretch myself here a little bit. And you have these combinations. Talked about the sensory and intuitive. This is important as far as the practicality of how we live this out. What does it look like? The couple, the Boswicks, confess this. It says, in the first years of our own marriage, we initially took turns doing the dreaded income tax forms every other year. We were each capable, but it was inefficient in the long run because we got rusty in the in-between year. In working out a harmonious interdependency on these differences, we have divided the task up to take advantage of our personal strengths. Some are imagining possibilities, some are practical, as it says earlier in the chart. When it comes to taxes, we need to be aware of that. When it comes to date night, we need to be aware of that. When it comes to parenting, we need to be aware of that. And then it talks about thinking and feeling. Are you a heart person? Are you a head person? Are you about personal convictions? Are you about logic? What does that look like? And we need to keep those in mind. Also, we can see that there's judging and perceiving. As I said, you can go back and look at some of those issues. I want to spend some time reading out of the book of First Corinthians. 1 Corinthians 13 is a very well-known passage. Perhaps you know it. Love is patient, love is kind, does not envy, does not boast, is not proud, is not rude, not self-seeking, it's not easily angered or not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs, does not delight in evil, but rejoices the truth. This is a great passage. We need to look at the verses prior to that as we close out chapter 4 in order to understand what does it look like in the sense of the diversity among the people. So, verse 12. This is chapter 12, verse 12. It says, the human body has many parts, but the many parts make up one whole body. So it is with the body of Christ. Some of you are Jews, some are Gentiles, some are slaves, and some are free. But we have all been baptized into one body by one Spirit, and we all share the same Spirit. Yes, the body has many different parts, not just one part. If a foot says, I am not a part of the body because I am not a hand, it does not make it less a part of the body. And if an ear says, I am not part of the body because I'm not an eye, would that make it any less a part of the body? If the whole body were an eye, how would you hear? If the whole body were an ear, how would you smell anything? But our bodies have many parts, and God has put each part just where he wants it. How strange a body would be if it had only one part. Yes, there are many parts, but only one part, the eye, but only one body. The eye can never say to the hand, I don't need you. And the head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. This is the same when it comes to marriage. Husbands should never say, I don't need you. Wives should say, I never need you. And even not only in words, but in actions. There must be patience. There must be understanding. There must be recognition of the differences that need not cause disunity. Chapter 5, we talk about the empowering marriage. Remember this is the circle going from the initial covenant to the mature covenant. And we talk about the empowering marriage. And the empowered marriage on page 63, it's talking about 4 ways in which power can be used. And these 5 ways, rather, talk about to exploit, to manipulate, to compete, to nurture, and the integrative influence. To exploit means brute force. To manipulate means devious. To compete is personal resources. To mature or to nurture influence through care. And the I'll keep doing that. Integrative influence, using personal power for another's sake. Biblical definition of power is integrative influence. Hereafter, we'll use the term empowerment. We mean to connotate power that is for another. We transfer power. We encourage power in the other. We support each other moving forward. As we think of power, it's important to note that how we view power decides how we treat our spouse. And this is where we come back to the role of marriage as husband and his wife. Broadly speaking, there are 2 terms in regard to styles of marriage. I mentioned them before. You've heard me say them a couple times already, perhaps more. And this is the complementarian view of marriage and the egalitarian view of marriage. The complementarian, using scripture, says that men and women are both created in the image of God, that both men and women have special talents given by God, and that the husband is the head of the household. He is the one who is to be in charge. The other view is egalitarian, recognizing that in biblical times, the model was the hierarchy beginning with the husband. But the egalitarian says that our culture is not the same, and that women have risen to other areas of authority in and outside the house. And so many people of Christian faith are comfortable with the egalitarian. Some complementarians aren't comfortable with egalitarians, and some egalitarians aren't happy with complementarians. Regardless, we understand that these are 2 views within the Christian church. It's not Christians against others. It's within the Christian church, there's debate. The Boswicks talk about some views, and I want to read the little portion of their understanding on page 65, and then we'll go on through 68. We talk about the traditional view of marriage. The traditional view places marital authority in the inherent position of the husband. According to this view, decisions having to do with the marriage and family life are ultimately determined by the husband. The corresponding implication is that the wife takes a submissive role. Traditionalists have 2 types: the hard patriarchy and soft patriarchy. And hard advocates adherence to a rigid structure of male ascribed authority. This is basically saying that he's in charge no matter what. Now, that does not mean, no matter what, does not mean abuse. It does not mean removing one's rights. But basically, all decisions come back to the husband. The soft patriarchy says places final authority with the husband, but emphasizes a suffering servant role. Remember Ephesians, after it says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, and wives submit to your husbands as unto the Lord. It says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. And this is the idea of self-sacrifice. The author's right. We believe that the legitimizing self-sacrifice on the part of the wife only is unbiblical. Historically, it leads to abuse of power against women throughout the world. While affirming the servant leadership model of soft patriarchy, we challenge how complementary is defined, especially in terms of limitations put on women. So there's some caution there. And then they're going to be talking about the egalitarian, this idea that husbands and wives bring their gifts together and talents together. In the middle of page 67, it says this. It says, marriage is to be a relationship of equals. There are two biblical-based models of marital equality: mutual submission and equal regard. I think it's fair to say, based on Ephesians 5:21, that needs to be mutual submission. Again, the disagreement is to what degree and on what issues. But we need to understand that there is love for each other. And equal regard for each other is so important. So the Baldwins bring about their model, which is neither complementarian nor egalitarian. It's a model they've created which brings in the strengths from both. It says on the bottom, page 68, both models, that complementarianism and the egalitarianism, both models are based on the assumption that human beings are self-centered and therefore power issues need to be regulated. In other words, who's in charge? We want to know those answers. We go to a meeting, we want to know who's leading the meeting. If we are in the middle of a political session, we want to understand who's going to be in charge of that. And we vote for or another person. It says, at a starting point in Christian marriage, both spouses are first and foremost to submit to the lordship of Jesus Christ, and then to one another. Later it says, in this proposed model, both spouses are challenged to empower and serve one another as imitators of Christ. Mutual empowerment has to do with each spouse reaching his or her full potential. So they don't really have a set of rules on what exactly their marriage line looks like, but I would say that they're making us think. Let's quit worrying about who's in charge, and let's think about the fact that we all are to honor Christ. Now we get to this thing called relational power, relationship power. Herein lies the greatest challenge for a couple, the transforming of personal power into relational power. A daunting task for two unique, self-confident individuals to become one. Later it says out of this that they gain power by encouraging full potential, affirming each other, and building on each other's gifts as they become all that God intended them to be, both individually and as a couple. I'm going to post a discussion question based upon today's lecture, so I encourage you to do that. Again, remember, you can always reach out to me with any questions.